All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. I want to start off with sharing my screen. I'm going to pop up some excellent pictures that everyone can look at. I know we can all see each other on the Zoom, but it's really fun to see folks in their natural environment, especially in their research environment. So we're here today to host a graduate student panel. We've asked these 4 individuals to help answer our questions and really just have an honest conversation about what's grad school all about, how do you get into grad school, how do you talk to advisors, and then the ups and downs of being a graduate student. So our first panelist on the left here is Taylor Blackman. Taylor is a first-year PhD student in forest resources at Penn State. His research interests include geographically isolated wetlands, hydric soils, headwater hydrology, wetland biodiversity, GIS, and biogeochemistry. His projects will focus on the geologic factors in the Appalachian Mountains of central Pennsylvania, contributing to geographically isolated wetlands, their genesis, along with measuring the influence of wetland frequency and lithologic structure on headwater hydrology and chemistry. Before this program, he completed a BS in water science from Penn State, an MS in soil science from Virginia Tech, a graduate certificate in GIS, and he also worked for the U.S. Forest Service as a soil scientist in Vermont, so he can hopefully answer a lot of our questions. Taylor's goal upon finishing school is to work for a federal agency managing and conserving wetlands. Then we have Jaclyn Viola. Jaclyn grew up in Keedsville, Maryland, and attended the University of Maryland for undergrad. She double majored in environmental sciences and plant sciences, graduated in December 2015. Then she started a graduate program at Ohio State University, but decided to transfer to another program in 2017. And she's now working on her PhD at Virginia Tech, researching the impacts of soils on grape and wine quality. She's been involved with soil judging for over 8 years, 3 years as an undergrad at Maryland, and then as an assistant coach at Ohio State, and most recently as head coach at Virginia Tech. Oh, you'll have to tell us more about that. Wow. And then we have Adrian Gallo. Adrian is a PhD student with the College of Agricultural Sciences at Oregon State University, studying carbon dynamics in ecosystems across the continental US. He began his schooling at Cal Poly. Woohoo! That's where I met Adrian first, in San Luis Obispo, where it was one of the few places in the country to get an undergraduate degree in soil science. After some internships in the Pacific Northwest, he wanted to pursue graduate school in the area. He started at Oregon State in 2013, focusing on intensive forest management impacts on soil physical and biological processes. While finishing his master's project, his advisor, Jeff Hatton, got a different grant funded for a PhD project using the National Ecological Observatory Network, or NEON, sites around the US, and asked Adrian to stay on at OSU for the project. Adrian is now in his 5th year investigating the sources of organic matter across sites and down soil profiles. And then we have Amanda Panino on the right. Amanda is a 2nd-year PhD student at Virginia Tech. She comes to Tech with 2 degrees in soil science, one from Oregon State University, and her master's with me at the University of Wyoming, where she was a soil judger at Oregon State and an assistant coach at the University of Wyoming. She's currently co-advised and a member of the Forest Soils Lab under Dr. Brian Strom, and Watershed Hydrology Lab, Dr. Kevin McGuire, which helps describe some of the work she does. Her research uses a combination of hydrological, geochemical, and pedological approaches to measure chemical weathering rates of spotosols in steep glaciated soils in the Northeast. Wow, guys, super impressive. Thank you so much for volunteering to serve on this panel. And again, if anyone wants to just jump in, add something to a question, embellish, tell us about your experiences, that would be excellent. I'm gonna stop sharing so we can see one another's faces a little bit easier here. All right, well, without further ado, let's get started. I think Chelsea has our first question.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm currently in grad school, but I'm asking some of these questions on behalf of some undergraduate students. So to begin, we have a two-part question. Whoever wants to answer it first, just give a wave or speak up. First part is, what did you look for in an advisor for grad school? And second to that is, how were you able to get potential graduate advisors to respond to your inquiries?
I could go first.
Great.
So personally, when I was looking for advisors, especially during my master's, I wanted to work with someone who was easy to talk to. I knew that I would have to turn to them for a lot of advice and come to them with a lot of uncertainty and knowledge gaps, and hope that they would help fulfill some of that for me. So yeah, I think like the number one thing during my master's was someone easy to talk to, and then that kind of morphed into, when looking for PhD advisors, someone easy to work with. They're going to be your biggest advocate a lot of the time, and they'll help you through some of the hard patches you'll go through during your degree. And then you're saying, how do you contact them? Is that the second question?
Yeah, how were you able to get them to respond to your inquiries? Because you can contact them, but they don't always answer back sometimes.
Yeah, so it's pretty funny. When I first sent my emails, I really thought them out. Like I would rewrite, show my friends. But then I found in the end what helped the most was conciseness. Really putting out there who you are, why you want to work for them is important. And not making it too long, because I mean, if they're a professor that gets hundreds of emails a day, it's going to be hard to sift through.
Great point. Does anyone else want to build off of that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I actually had a really bad experience with an advisor. So, pro tip, find an advisor who's really nice, just like Amanda said, who you can talk to, who's going to help you, who's going to mentor you. And it's really hard to tell from just like talking to someone. And so I highly suggest talking to their current grad students, talk to students who've taken their classes, talk to, graduate students who've graduated, and try to get a sense of, their mentoring style. Are they really hands-on, or do they kind of just let you do your own thing? Because advisors are really, really important to your success in grad school, and is the main reason why I ended up transferring halfway through grad school. And the same thing, it also helps to get in touch with former and current grad students. You can try to get in touch with the professor through them. Sometimes that makes it a little easier instead of just emailing the professor directly. Figure out someone who knows them, like talk to Dr. Vaughn, talk to people talk to Chelsea. I'm sure they have people in mind who might be interested in having grad students.
I'll add into that, going off of what Amanda said, be concise in your emails when you're contacting them, but also this will benefit in a couple ways. Take your time and read their background, read some of their publications, understand where their mind is, where their research might be going. And because the field of soil science, hydrology, anything under environmental science, people can put it as this is soil science, but it's huge. Some people want to do, soil taxonomy versus soil health and so on. So really get to know who you're going to talk to. And that kind of helps you go into the first part of who do I even want to apply to? Because when I was looking at my advisor, I wanted somebody who represented, where I wanted to be in maybe 20, 30 years. So at Virginia Tech, Dr. Galbraith, he's a well-known wetland scientist and very, very smart about what he does. Here at Penn State, Dr. Miller is great for remote sensing. Dr. Duncan's good for hydrology. And Dr. White's a good geoscientist. So I really thought about where I wanted to be and kind of look for people that were in those positions right now.
Great.
I want to reiterate a point that both Amanda and Jaclyn made. Amanda made the point that your advisor is going to be helping you through some really tough times and knowledge gaps. And I underestimated how important of a factor that would be. And Jaclyn mentioned how you can talk to previous graduate students or maybe current graduate students to figure out kind of where they are. I think both of those are really important pieces of advice and can really help to expedite who you could work with, who you want to work with as well. My experience was really lucky because I focused my area of graduate work on a geographic region. So I really only applied to 4 people. So I tailored my messages to those 4 people. 2 of them responded and 1 of them had funding. So it was very lucky. And I was very lucky that my advisor, we worked really well together. So I decided to stay on for another project. But if I were to do it over again, I would definitely speak to other graduate students that they have previously had, because that gives you a lot of insight into, whether or not you two would work well together.
Yeah, and it's not weird to reach out to other graduate students at all. I have, as a graduate student under my own advisors, been contacted many times asking for my work style with my advisors and my experience at Virginia Tech. So don't be afraid to ask graduate students anything down to not even just about the advisor, but like what it's like living in that place, which can be very important.
Yeah. One thing I like that all 4 of you have touched on is when you're applying to grad school, it's part of your life. It's not just school. You need to think about personal aspects, the academic side of things, your location. So those were all really great points. Thank you for that. Shall we move on to question 2?
Yeah, I've got the next
Great.
question. So my question is, do you guys see a benefit in pursuing a graduate degree from an institution different than your undergraduate?
I would like to start with this one because I went away from my master's degree to another institution, but then I came back for my PhD to where I got my bachelor's. So I think it's important to get out and maybe see what other institutions can offer and make connections. But you also need to weigh the fact at your home institution, do you have funding already set up? Do you have good relationships set up that you can go right into a program? Is this program, exactly what you want? Do you want to go into academia? So if you want to do that, you might want to look to another institution. I think it really does, it's an individual choice that you have to, individual factors.
Yeah, I think that the atmosphere right now is, maybe it's an easy move to go somewhere else, but if you have a family in a location or your partner has the primary income in that location, then maybe I think it's just a personal, reason to stay or go. But that said, I did go to 3 different institutions. And because of that, I'd say the perk is my academic network is pretty large. Especially when I go to conferences, I feel like I see someone around every corner that I know. And that can be beneficial if that's what you're looking for. But I feel that I know plenty of people that have gotten all 3 degrees from the same university and it hasn't hindered them getting a job.
I agree with what both of them said. I would not suggest getting all 3 degrees from the same university, just because I think going to a different place really expands not only your adaptability to like new areas, but also you get to learn new things and meet new people and expand your network. And just from personal experience, getting out of Maryland was really good for me. And then I was in Ohio and now I'm in Virginia, and you learn new things and you have, there's a little bit of a learning curve just to being in a new college, a new university. And I think that can be really useful down the line.
For soil science in particular, it's one of those fields that location, geographically speaking, can make a really big influence on what you study. So if you do go to 2 different places, and I want to expand the question a little bit to go from undergrad to graduate school and include master's and PhD, whether you should stay at the same institution for either of those switches. And I think for soil science, it can help, but of course it depends on the project. So I had this conversation with my advisor of, you did your master's here. here's a PhD project, but it's a gray mark on your CV because you did, your graduate degree at the same location. The project that I'm a part of now is a literal continental scale project, so it doesn't really have that much to do with my geographic setting. So it's it depends is the classic science answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess, sorry, just to go off one thing that Adrian said also. Yeah, if you're staying in the same university, I highly recommend making sure that your next degree is just a little bit different. You can be the master of one, or, one trick pony, or you can kind of work and expand your network. I know, like Adrian, for example, the project that he works on, we have like 15 collaborators or something like that. So his, like, who he works with on a day-to-day basis isn't just people at Oregon State. He cross collaborates with different universities, and that, you can kind of weigh that kind of option.
All right. How about Matthew? You want to ask the next question?
I actually did not have anything
okay.
for master related. I had more on the governmental side of things.
Oh, okay. You didn't get the list.
No, sorry.
Okay. I'll stand in here for Matthew and ask this next question. Would taking a break between your undergrad and graduate degrees make getting your graduate degree more difficult?
So I can't specifically say, because I didn't take a break. I took, a couple months off, but I wish I had, honestly. The reason I didn't was because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to get letters of recommendation from my professors, my undergrad professors, because, I went to the University of Maryland, which has a ton of students, and I was in big classes, and so I was just worried they wouldn't remember who I was. But now, 7 or 8 years later, I'm still in touch with those professors. And so I don't think it would have been any problem getting recommendation letters from them a year later. So I don't think taking a break between undergrad and grad school is anything to be, anything that would be a problem. I kind of wish I had. So that's just my 2 cents.
I will say if you do take a break, I would get all of your preparation for grad school, even if you're on the fence about it, get some of that stuff done before you take a break. Like, you can take your GREs, and those scores are good for up to 5 years. And it is much easier to take GREs right out of college than, say, after a year or 2 of just working. So even if you're on the fence about it, prepare for both opportunities.
I didn't take a break in between any of these degrees, but I think it could have definitely been helpful. I know a lot of the folks in the College of Forestry, and I've been here for a long time, so I met a lot of them. It's really common for them to take a year or many years break and do some work, either in the government or in private industry, and learn to focus on what are the questions you really want to ask. And I think for them, because they took a break away from school and they found a need and a drive, they were very focused and really motivated to pursue graduate school when it was the right time and the right question that they found they were really interested in. So I don't think it's a bad idea to take a break at all.
I don't think it would have benefited me as a master's student, but I think I definitely wish I would have taken a break between my master's and my PhD, especially if you're looking to publish your master's work.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I know I'm not necessarily a panelist here, but I agree with Amanda. Taking a break in between, say, your master's and your PhD, sometimes it just works wonders for you to clear your mind in between projects and take a break from sitting at a desk. I know I took time off to farm for 5 months in between my master's and my PhD, and it made all the difference on my end, and I moved on to the next state with a clear mind and was ready to dive back into things. So sometimes a break is good for you as a person too.
Yeah, with hindsight is 2020. I do wish I would have taken a break between master's and PhD. So I agree with you, Chelsea.
And it could look good actually if you're not maybe planning on staying in academia. It really helps boost your CV or your resume. If all you have is I went to college, then I went to college, then I went to college, that may not be, depending on the job you're looking for, exactly helpful.
Right. And you could be strategic with it too. If it's a summer off, that doesn't look like a big gap on a resume. That's only a few months, but you're still gaining that experience. I know Taylor, when he worked for the Forest Service, that was just a temp position for the summer months, correct, Taylor?
Yeah, so I found what I believe is a unicorn is an emergency GS9 soil scientist position out of Vermont Green Mountain National Forest. It worked out for the perfect window that I had between my master's and my PhD. But I think Chelsea's right. Yeah, even if it is that small gap, taking some time to reset is good.
Okay, great. Noah, did you want to ask the next question?
Yeah. So just going right out from your undergrad, how were you able to decide on what exactly you wanted to study for your master's? Was it that you just set your mind on one thing and only looked for professors that are studying that one thing, or did you just kind of keep it broad and really just take what you can get? And like, I find plenty of things interesting. I'm probably not alone, you know, and then there's plenty of areas in environmental science that you could study. And so how do you decide on which to pick?
What's funded? Unfortunately, sometimes you shouldn't pay for graduate school in our field. That's really important, is where is the funding, and then kind of narrow it down from there. I mean, obviously don't do something you absolutely don't like or feel like you're qualified for, but it relieves a lot of pressure of starting at a new school and not having to apply for grants right away.
And I think sometimes it's just fate. I was in my undergrad and got linked in with a research experience for undergrads at Shale Hills CZO. And the geoscience professor that works out there has been my advisor and on my committee, or helping me out since then. So it's like 5 years of just working with this person. So honestly, you never know where things are going to take you. Just be open and kind of keep maybe like a general idea. Like I know I want to work in forested watersheds and stuff like that. So general idea and go with that.
So I work on a very specific thing, and I decided that I wanted to work on that specific thing as a junior in undergrad. I was actually, at the time, I was just a plant science major, and I took soil chemistry because I had to, and I didn't want to take it, but I loved it. And I joined the soil judging team and just fell in love with soil. And I heard about this thing called terroir, this term that means the soil can impact the taste of wine. And I still think that's the coolest thing ever. And so I just decided then that's what I wanted to do. And I looked for professors on both sides, on the viticulture wine side and the soil science side, and just contacted them. I was like, hey, this is the thing I want to do. Do you have any money for grad students? And so sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I think it's probably easier and better to be a little more open on what project you want to do. Honestly, at this point in my life and grad student career, I would pick an advisor over a specific project anytime, because I think the advisor is that important. So maybe find good advisors and see what they're working on, see what you're interested in.
I love Jaclyn's point at the end there. I want to come back to that about advisors. But Noah, to answer your question, I would say there's two things. One is getting internships if you can. So the way I found Oregon State is I had two internships with the Forest Service and then another internship with a GeoCorps America program in Oregon. and kind of all of those internships over the years. And I've known other students to get internships as, undergraduate workers for a graduate student, kind of understanding what research is. But getting those kinds of internships, whether it's, a public agency, a government agency, or another graduate student that you work under, getting that kind of research experience really helped for me to realize, like, wow, they're like looking at this rather narrow set of questions, but I think it's pretty cool too. I want to work on these, sets of questions or this ecosystem. So that's kind of how I decided, which was, my internships in a geographic area that I really, really enjoyed, and knew that I could spend a lot more time researching these things. And then to Jaclyn's point about finding an advisor over a project, in my extracurricular time, I also host a podcast where I interview graduate students about their research. And we do, economics people, social science, engineers, forestry majors. And a really common theme is that you can have an awesome project that's going to change the world. But if you don't work well with your advisor, you're not going to like graduate school at all. But if you have an advisor that you do work well with, a project that maybe isn't the most razzle-tazz thing in the world, you're actually going to have a pretty awesome time in graduate school. I'm sure we can get into that more, but I really agree with Jaclyn there.
All right, thanks everybody. Let's see, my turn here. Okay, and I think I heard someone allude to this, but do you have any advice for anyone who is really on the fence about graduate school?
I would say do your homework, talk with advisors again that you have in mind. They might be able to sway you one way or the other. And I think to Taylor's point, sometimes it's fate. And if that perfect project and advisor comes along, I wouldn't just go to grad school just to go to grad school, because it could be miserable if you're not liking where you are, who you're working with, what you're doing. Yeah, just doing your homework.
Yeah, I think earlier I was talking about, if you're on the fence, prepare, because some of the stuff like the GREs, taking that's important, because it's not fun, and it's better to have that when a lot of, being a student is fresh in your brain. I can tell you, I worked for a number of years before going to college in my undergrad, and having to relearn how to be a student can be problematic. But other than that, don't ever do what you're not sure about, and really take some time to think about where you want to be in like 10, 15, 20 years, and what that means to get there.
Yeah, for advice, if you're on the fence, definitely don't jump into a PhD program then, if you're on the fence. Definitely stick to a master's if you are on the fence. But yeah, that's definitely a tough call. I would say think about it really hard, because a master's is, only 2 or 3 years. But it could feel like a lot longer if you're kind of not totally invested.
All right, thanks for that.
Yeah, so next question I have here, kind of going back to the type of work that you do for your professors. Maybe I know Jaclyn kind of already answered this, but did you adopt the work that your advisors are already doing, or did you come to them with your own idea? And then maybe specifically, Jaclyn, are you only doing what you are doing, or are you helping your professor along with her other projects and everything like that?
So for me, I proposed my PhD project and sort of proposed my advisors. I'm co-advised, sort of roped them into it. Neither of them have ever worked in vineyards before. They're both soil scientists. One's a soil fertility expert and one's a soil hydrologist, soil physics. And it's really hard because I've written like 16 grants and 2 of them have gotten funded, but they're like really small. And so finding money is really difficult if you're starting from scratch on a project like I'm doing. But it can be done if there's something you're really passionate about. It's possible. I do sometimes assist on other projects in the lab just to get, some travel money. One of my advisor's other projects is near Charlottesville, Virginia. And so they travel up there all the time. And so I'll tag along and help them. And then they'll drop me off at a vineyard and pick me up on the way back. So you can finagle money a little bit that way, but not too far. And I know even on projects that you don't propose yourself, you do have some flexibility within the project to make it your own. So don't be too worried if it's not something that, it's not your dream project. Don't be too worried.
I would say, just to follow off of what she was talking about, when you do come into a situation, whether it is your own project that you're helping build through collaboration, that's my circumstance. I'm working with all of my advisors to kind of build something new. Or you do come into an existing project, money is an important thing. And a lot of universities have opportunities for graduate students. I just picked up a grant from a lab here on campus that is going to allow me to do a little bit more water sampling because I wanted to include some of these extra sites. So, if you do get into something and you want a little bit more autonomy, the nice thing about graduate school is if you really care, you can put in for grants and stuff like that and get the funding to do what you want to do, or at least bring something different to the table.
Yeah, and if you come in on a funded proposal, usually that means that there's certain deliverables that the PIs that wrote the grant before you have to fulfill in order to keep that funding to keep you on. For example, that's how I kind of came in, is already on a funded NSF proposal project. But I'm working with my advisor to, tackle those deliverables, but then also expand it out to my own interests. So I'm going to have 2 dissertation chapters that are going to be completely related to what I'm doing, but my own spin, my own personal spin. And so even if the project isn't exactly the way you wanted, my master's project was exactly this way. It wasn't exactly what I wanted. So I worked hard to try to find how I can kind of morph it into what I was interested in.
Noah, to answer your question, I came on a project that already had deliverables, as Amanda had mentioned, and my advisor specializes in a couple different methods. So my work primarily is using those methods, the same methods that my advisor uses. The methods are pretty broad, so you can apply them to a lot of different ecosystems or answer a lot of different questions. So while I'm using I'm like, kind of his brainchild in a way in terms of, how we think about the method and what it means. There are specific questions that you can ask, within those methods. But it's, I think I'm a little bit more different than the other panelists, that I'm definitely following his footsteps a bit more.
I think one key thing that everybody keeps dancing around here is whether you come in on a funded project or are coming up with a project on your own, in the end, communication is key between you and your advisor to reach your goals or have those deliverables ready at the end of your dissertation research. I know I found that is really important, so you're not stepping on anyone's toes along the way, but it is valuable to learn how to collaborate with your advisors, also to seek out your own individual research, because in the end, once you graduate, you are going to be a single entity and a researcher on your own, no longer a grad student. So I think that's really important to develop those skills while you are in grad school. And one of the ways to do that is to come up with your own research ideas and bring them to fruition. Noah, it looks like you have a follow-up question here.
Yeah, I just have the next question here, and it's just all about how is your time divided? So if you guys could each put a percentage on the amount of time you're doing research, writing, in the lab, in the field, could you give me a number for all that? And I'm sure it's different for everybody, so I just be curious.
Maybe pre-coronavirus?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it depends. Oh, sorry, Charlie, you go.
Go ahead.
No.
Thank you. I think for probably a lot of other people too, it has to do with season. During winter, I'm doing a lot more GIS, more writing, planning for the summer. During the summer, I do a lot of work with wetlands, so I have a very, specific window to get out there and maybe see some amphibian reproduction or inundation, stuff like that. So, but in terms of the semester, I'm a TA now, and I spend, about 20, since COVID, it's gone up to about 40% of my normal weekly time working with the TA because I do remote sensing classes online, but it's about that. It's pretty reasonable. It's usually seasonal.
Yeah, it's gonna be really heavily dependent on what type of project you have. So if you're more of like a modeler, you're gonna spend a lot of time at your desk. If you're more lab-based, where you're working on some method, you'll be in the lab, field-based. But I think also it depends on where you are in your degree. So a lot of the beginning might be the front load work of doing all the lab work. And then later on, it's gonna be more writing, right? So I think that it just kind of depends where you are in your degree. I definitely spent more time at my desk towards the end of my master's. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to. I can't give you a percentage.
So I feel like I spend about 25% of my time just answering emails. I know that's not on your list, but it really feels like putting out fires and answering emails is a lot of what I do. But like Taylor said, it's very seasonal. I work in vineyards. And so throughout the growing season, I'm out sampling tissue, sampling soil. In the fall, that's my crazy season because the grapes are ripening and, the vineyard will tell me we're harvesting tomorrow and I have to drop everything and go get the grapes. So pretty much all summer, all fall, I'm in the field just struggling to record data. And then most of the time in the winter, I'll be writing and analyzing data or working in the lab.
To put some hard numbers on how I split my time, I have kind of two phases of my PhD project and my master's project that I think of. The first is setting up the field experiments and going out to the field, taking measurements, installing sensors, yada, yada. And that took up probably 80% of my time going out to the field and doing that stuff. So that left me with 10% of my time worth of classes. I skipped a lot of class going out to the field. And then 10% writing and prepping. So that's, the front half of the project. And then the back half, which, pre-COVID, but kind of where I am now, I would probably say 50% of my time is devoted to writing, 40% is devoted to teaching. And so that depends on whether or not you're on an assistantship or whether you're teaching to pay your way through. And that leaves, 10% as a quote unquote research, whether, running stats, getting new ideas, et cetera, et cetera. So it shifts a lot depending on the project, the season, and where you are in your degree.
I'm going to agree with Jaclyn. A lot of emails, a lot of meetings. I find that it can sometimes split up your day having meeting, especially, gosh, now how many Zoom meetings I've had today,
As a follow-up to that, there was a really interesting point that wasn't noted here. Graduate classes. Do you guys have any comments on that? Because we talk about research projects all the time, field work, things like that. What are graduate classes? What should you be looking to take as a graduate student? Is it to just get those credits, or are you taking those classes to gain specific skills? Does anybody have any comments on that to guide that process?
Yeah, I have. I was very lucky in that my undergraduate degree prepared me extraordinarily well, but I'm pretty lucky in that there was an undergraduate degree in soils, and I came to do my graduate work in soils. So I felt like I was very well prepared, and I didn't need to take some of the classes that were otherwise required because I already had a lot of these skills. There are two classes in particular that I can think of that I took that directly pertained to skill sets that I didn't have that I needed, and predominantly stats classes, geostatistics, and that those were extraordinarily helpful and ones that I wouldn't have gotten in undergrad.
I think it depends on the grad program. For instance, here at Virginia Tech, my requirement is just that I take 27 graded credits. They don't specify which classes those have to be. And so you have a lot of freedom to choose. So, I took soil chemistry, I took a viticulture class, took a lot of statistics. And I'm in a wine class right now that I chose to do for fun because I didn't know much about wine. But at Ohio State, the department I was in had a lot of requirements. They had, I think, 5 or 6 required classes that you had to take. And so that was a lot of your time that was, eaten up by those specific classes. And they were taught, once a year. So you had to be available at that semester at that time to take those classes. And I've had a range of professors in those classes. A lot of times graduate classes are more discussion-based, more like journal clubs where you read a research article and then discuss it. But then I've had other graduate level classes that are lecture-based and really rigorous and a whole bunch of homework. So I don't know how to generalize graduate school classes very well.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Jaclyn. Most of my graduate classes have been very discussion oriented. I haven't had too many that were lecture really. And I also find that taking these classes, if you can't tie it back to what you're researching, it's probably not the best class for you. Almost every graduate class I've had has tried to find a way to put your own research into it, whether it's a final project or you pick a discussion that you lead or something like that. I have found that if I haven't been able to use it, it's probably not a helpful class and not a good spending of my time.
The one thing that helped me is planning my graduate courses. So coming in from Virginia Tech with a master's, I was able to transfer 10 credits over. And for a PhD, the credit load is about 50 to 60 credits to meet the requirements. So this first year, where I knew I was going to be having to do a lot of literature review and just reading, and I wouldn't be so much in the field anyways, I think I scheduled 22, maybe 23 credits. And just knocked out a bunch of credits, so that way over the next 3 years that I have funding on this NSF fellowship that I'm on, I can only have to take maybe 1 or 2 classes a semester and can devote more of that time towards field stuff, things like that. So planning I think is a really good thing to do going into your.
I would definitely agree with that from experience. Just to connect this question back to previous question, one other thing that I found is important is if you stay at the same institution. I know I did my undergrad and my master's at the same institution. Sometimes it's really hard to actually find classes that you haven't taken before. Maybe Taylor can attest to that, or Adrian transitioning between that master's and PhD. So that's something to consider as well if you think you want to stay at the same institution, that you might need to reach out to, other local schools to get those external credits or whatnot.
One benefit of staying at the same institution for my master's and PhD was most of my credits were able to roll over. And I had already taken all of the soil science classes offered. So I basically only had to take 1 or 2 extra classes for my PhD, which from a time perspective really helped to just let me dive into my research. So an amendment to my previous answer of maybe it's not the best idea to stay at the same institution. For me, it saved a 1.5 years worth of time taking classes that I already feel pretty comfortable in.
Right, it's important. And sometimes
Kind
you
of
get to
nice having the flexibility of being able to choose all your own classes too. I feel like my advisors never know what class I'm in. There was, what class are you in? But you really get a lot of flexibility to take a lot of classes that you maybe wouldn't normally have went. Like I've taken almost all geology classes since I've been here, and I've never taken a geology class. It's kind of fun.
Cool. Well, eventually advisors have to sign off on a program of study. So undergrads, keep that in mind. You will be guided. All right. Transitioning into our next question. What would you say is the most difficult part of grad school? We've talked about classes, managing your time, things like that. If you could bring it down to one single point or a couple.
I think personally it's shutting off. I think as a grad student, as a researcher, I mean, obviously to get to be in this position, you have to have a love and a passion for the science or whatever you're doing to get there first. And I think a lot of people that are in these positions, when you get home at the end of the day, it's hard to kind of stop thinking about frangipans or, glade soils. And it goes into the whole, workload balance, come home, shut off, like develop this, like I'm going to wake up and work from this period to this period. Like being a graduate student, the hardest thing is self-discipline because you will have an advisor there, but unless you have a really bad advisor, they're not really going to be around. They're going to treat you like an adult that you can manage yourself. So I would really say is take care of yourself is probably the hardest part about grad school.
And just to add to that, I totally agree. To me, that's the most difficult part too. The other difficult part is like juggling all the different things that you have to accomplish and like meeting deadlines and remembering that you have a deadline. Because it's easy to focus on classes because, it's structured, there are deadlines, you have an exam at this date, but then also, getting your work done, getting your research finished, getting manuscripts written when they're supposed to be written. To me, that's really, really difficult to keep it all straight in my head. And I take a lot of notes and I have, 4 calendars up at any time, but it's still difficult.
This is a hard one. I think I struggle a lot with imposter syndrome. I sit there and I have meetings with my advisors and I'm like, do they know? I don't really remember much from organic chemistry, but it's like, doesn't matter. It comes back to you. Yeah, sometimes I'm sitting here and I'm like, I'm not cut out for this. I can't handle this. And then I breathe and it's okay. And I am capable. I was chosen for the position, right? You will be chosen for a position and they will have chosen that knowing that you're capable. So that I still to this day struggle with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, Chelsea, this is a heck of a hard question. What's the hardest part of grad school? I actually really agree with Taylor, although I only came to this realization later on in my grad career. And if you would have asked me, in my master's, I would have had a different answer. But, grad school takes a really long time. And how you stay motivated is really important. As a personal example, when I got a knee injury and I wasn't able to play soccer or go running or go biking. And I didn't realize that, those kinds of exercise habits, the things that I would always do to like shut my brain off, the one time I wasn't thinking about mineral organic interactions in the subsoil, like that one time of me exercising, doing whatever activity it was my therapy. And when I couldn't do those things, my whole balance of, coming home to like not do work, but just to eat or just to sleep was totally off kilter. And like for that period that I was injured, like physically injured, it was also like a mental debilitation of I can't think anymore. Like nothing was clear. So knowing how to unwind and, doing self-care in whatever way that looks, whether that's, knitting or making super awesome earrings of spodosols like Jaclyn does, finding some way to unwind and understanding that that is possibly more important than other things you're doing. That for me was the hardest thing to kind of learn the hard way.
We say Spottisol in Maryland, just throwing that out there.
I'm with you.
Soda all the way.
Rolling off of your point, Adrian, I think it's really important to know how to roll with the punches. Grad school totally throws things your way that you don't expect. I mean, it's really great you brought up those injuries. I suffered my own injury in my master's and my ankle wouldn't go through my wetsuit. And it was the middle of December. I can't go sample in Rhode Island in the middle of December without a 5 to 7 mil wetsuit on or I will freeze to death. So, you got to find alternatives in order to get your work done. And it's not easy sometimes. So knowing how to roll with those punches, use your resources, I think that's super important to navigate those difficult times.
Okay, well, we're getting near the end of our time here. Why don't we jump ahead? Austin, why don't you ask your next question? And maybe we'll end with this, and then I might ask you guys just to add a few more thoughts at the very end there.
Yeah, so my question is, what aspect of soil science do you guys feel needs more attention in the research field? And why?
I guess I could go first. I think what I struggle most with is dynamic properties. A lot of the work I've done has been collecting a soil sample, which is a snapshot in time, not really the whole picture. So I think if maybe as soil scientists we can think more on the temporal level, which we know a lot of dynamic processes happen, but quantifying it's really hard. So yeah, just dynamic properties. I think a lot about that.
I think interdisciplinary approaches to soil science, that is what I'm really gearing my entire education for. I do a lot of work with, amphibian identification, plants, soils, hydrology, GIS. And, I think it's that whole, if you want to connect the issues that are apparent in soil science to the people that, because most environmental problems are not environmental problems, they're human problems. And interdisciplinary approaches for me have been able to connect a lot of dots, make the story more complete to really, talk to people about. So yeah, that's, I think is most important.
I'm thinking of the Donald Rumsfeld quote of, there are known unknowns, known knowns, unknown knowns. And especially in soil science, every couple of years, there are new things we realize we don't know. So that one makes the field super exciting, and answering your question very difficult because, a couple of years from now, there's something else I think that we should really start investigating because we learned that we don't know it. But at least today, the thing that really grinds my gears is the issue of scale in soil. The things that happen on the nanoscale when we do, SEM imaging or nanosims or FTIC-RMS, all these like really sexy cyclotron, spectroscopy stuff. It's incredibly difficult to relate what happens on the nanoscale to the pedon, polypedon, and ecosystem function scale. And bridging that scale gap for me is, that's kind of always at the top of mind of if we can understand what's happening at the micro, how can that inform what happens on the macro levels? Because, soils are a part of large ecosystems, and I'd love to be able to understand how these ecosystems work. If we know what happens on the micro scale, I think it'd be awesome to explore that further.
Yeah, sort of along those same lines, one of my advisors is a soil physicist and hydrologist, and he does a lot of very small scale models that I feel like don't necessarily, they don't represent soil across a broader scale. And so I feel like we need to make things more relevant to broader scales, like Adrian was saying, and maybe, to different systems. Because I work in vineyards where a great soil for a vineyard is very different than a great soil for growing corn. And so I think broadening our scope and educating people a little better is very helpful for that. And one of the best things you can do is be a soil judger, because that gives you a really broad view of soil as a whole and different parts of the country if we were allowed to travel.
So Jaclyn, that's perfect timing for the final question we want to ask you. As the University of Wyoming soil judging team, as you know, we should be on our 4th day of practice pits at Ohio State, but we're not. We're all at home, tucked in safe, hopefully. And we'd like to know, how has soil judging impacted your career thus far, to those of you who have been soil judgers?
Well, like I said earlier, soil judging is why I'm here. It's what got me interested in soil in the first place. It made me realize soil wasn't just brown and, gross, wet, muddy. And it gave me contacts. I have friends from soil judging that I still keep in touch with. My professors, I had 2 soil judging coaches at the University of Maryland. Both of them wrote me recommendation letters. I'm still in touch with both of them. I'm in the process of publishing a paper with one of the soil judging coaches. It's accepted for publication. Yay. And now this past year, I actually served as the head coach of the Virginia Tech team because Dr. Galbraith was running the contest, and you can't run the contest and coach the team. And so I just kind of took over, and it was super rewarding. It was a lot of fun, and I learned so much. And so most of what I know about soil, I feel like, comes from soil judging, either tangentially from knowing people and having a great network, or just directly from being in soil pits all the time.
Yeah, and this is a totally just like a personal experience. To say it altered the course of my life is slightly an understatement. It's that where I met Karen, and the reason I went to University of Wyoming was I met Karen at a soil judging competition. But I also think that it got me really up close and personal with the soil, which I had never done before. You take an intro soils class and maybe you go see a pit, but being down in the pit and getting it all up in your face and down your shoes and really touching with it and interacting, I think has defined me more as a soil scientist, which I think is pretty great.
Yeah, from soil judging, I did that in undergrad, and the practice I found extraordinarily valuable because you had to go out to as many different locations as you could and look at topographic factors and doing that kind of landscape interpretation and figuring out why the soil is there. I found extraordinarily valuable. I look back at it now, and the reason that my advisor asked me to stay on for my PhD is not because I had the skill set from my master's project, but because one of the principal things that I'd be doing in my PhD is describing soils from all around the country. And if I hadn't have had the experience doing soil judging where we went around the country, describing and sampling soils, he may not have asked me to be a part of the project. So I think there's a direct correlation, at least for me, that soil judging helped me secure this PhD position.
Yep. And I was not on soil judging, but I did get a chance to go on the Northeast pedology tour, the Arctic soils tours, and a lot of that experiential learning, those trips working with other soil grad students and professors, there were some of the better opportunities I've had to learn, it was really nice being in Alaska and seeing everybody run to a pit while I was there with my windbreaker over my head, flying the drone. And at the end of the day, bringing all those perspectives together, you kind of got this really nice view on the science.
Chelsea, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, no, I think everyone has brought up great points of, being in the pit, actually physically touching the soil means so much to anybody at any level, but especially undergraduate students, actually learning how to apply the science. I know it's benefited my career immensely, and it's why I'm here doing what I do right now. And now, I help coach the team here at UW, and it really builds those skills too. You're now training the next, generation of soil judgers, which they're not just the next generation of soil judgers, they're the next generation of soil scientists. We're going to go on to work, for BLM, NRCS, the Forest Service, in academia, and they're still going to apply these skills every day, everywhere. So it's really important, and I think it's just cool to feel that impact.
Yeah, and I'm just going to sort of summarize there what I heard. And one of the things that came out of it was a sense of community. And I think that's almost as important as learning those technical skills of going in there and describing horizons and color and understanding water movement through the profile. It's developing those networks. And Taylor, you're absolutely right. Other experiential learning opportunities, like that Arctic Soils field tour, that's where I met Taylor and Jaclyn. I know Jaclyn, I'd seen you out soil judging, but we really got to know each other well there. So nothing replaces the field, in small part because of those relationships that you build when you're out there. That's really awesome. I mean, the reason that the four of you are here today as our panelists are because I knew you as stellar soil scientists and grad students out there. And thank you for agreeing to serve on our panel. This has been a joy. This has been awesome. I have a million more questions. I feel like we could dive into so many different angles, but maybe Adrian will have to look you all up and interview you for his podcast. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, we're looking for more people to interview remotely. Now everything's remote, so.
Okay, does anyone have any last thoughts that they want to add before we sign off here? Okay, doesn't look like it. Thanks a lot. I'm going to send a follow-up email to y'all requesting your address. And I will definitely send you the link to wherever we are able to share this video, or even just an audio file would be excellent. So with that, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
bye-bye.
Thanks for
We'll see you
organizing.
in the pits.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.